Teenage girl brings doll to every appointment. Therapist finally opens it and gasps. The rain drummed against the windows of Dr. Sarah Chen's office on Maple Street, creating a rhythmic backdrop that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat after 15 years of practice. The brick building that housed her therapy office had seen countless stories unfold within its walls, but none quite like the one that was about to walk through her door on this gray October afternoon in suburban Cleveland. Sarah adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and glanced at the clock. 3:47 p.m. Emma Morrison would arrive in 13 minutes, just as she had every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 months. Always on time, always with that doll clutched against her chest like a lifeline in a storm she couldn't escape. The coffee in Sarah's mug had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already preparing for the session ahead, reviewing her notes from their previous meetings. Emma Morrison, 16 years old, referred by her high school counselor after a series of concerning incidents, panic attacks in class, isolation from peers, and what the school described as inappropriate attachment to a childhood toy. Sarah had seen her share of adolescents clinging to comfort objects during difficult transitions, but Emma's case felt different. There was something in the girl's eyes when she looked at that doll. Not comfort, but something closer to fear, or perhaps protection, as if the doll held secrets that only Emma could understand. The intercom buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. "Dr. Chen, Emma Morrison is here for her appointment. Send her in, please." The door opened with a soft creak, and Emma entered as she always did, quietly, almost apologetically, as if she was intruding on sacred space. Her dark hair hung in loose waves around her face, partially obscuring her features, but Sarah could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the doll's faded pink dress. The doll itself was a study in contradictions. Clearly expensive once, with delicate porcelain features and real human hair that had been lovingly styled, but now showing signs of years of handling. The dress was worn thin in places, the hair tangled despite obvious attempts to keep it neat. Most unsettling were the doll's eyes, bright blue glass that seemed to follow movement around the room. "Good afternoon, Emma," Sarah said, her voice warm but professional. "How are you feeling today?" Emma settled into her usual spot on the leather couch, positioning the doll carefully on her lap, smoothing its dress with practiced motions. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice suggested otherwise. "Lily's been quiet today." This was another constant. Emma's insistence that the doll, which she called Lily, had moods and behaviors of its own. Sarah had initially interpreted this as normal imaginative play, perhaps regression due to trauma, but the more she observed Emma's interactions with the doll, the more concerned she became. "Tell me about quiet," Sarah prompted gently, pulling out her notepad. "What does it mean when Lily is quiet?" Emma's grip on the doll tightened almost imperceptibly. "She doesn't talk much when it's raining. She says the rain makes her remember things she'd rather forget." Sarah made a note, observing how Emma spoke about the doll as if it were completely separate from herself. Classic dissociation, perhaps, but there was something more here. Emma's relationship with the doll seemed less like comfort and more like guardianship. "Emma, we've been meeting for several months now, and I've noticed that Lily is very important to you. Can you tell me more about how she came to be with you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Emma's breathing became shallow, and she began rocking slightly, holding the doll closer to her chest. This was familiar territory. Any question about the doll's origin sent Emma into a state of distress that could take the remainder of the session to resolve. "My mom gave her to me," Emma said finally, her voice barely audible. Before she couldn't anymore." Sarah leaned forward slightly. This was more than Emma had ever revealed about her family situation. According to the file, Emma lived with her father and stepmother after her biological mother had abandoned the family when Emma was 12. But Emma had never spoken about her mother directly before. "That must have been very special, receiving Lily from your mother," Sarah said carefully. "What do you remember about that time?" Emma's rocking intensified, and she began whispering something to the doll, words too quiet for Sarah to hear. But the tone was urgent, almost pleading. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to stare directly at Sarah, and for a moment, she felt an uncomfortable chill run down her spine. "She says I'm not supposed to tell," Emma said suddenly, her voice stronger but filled with anxiety. "She says it's not safe." Who says it's not safe, Emma? Lily. She knows things, she sees things, she was there when… Emma's voice trailed off, and she pulled the doll even closer, almost hiding behind it. Sarah set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, recognizing the signs of an impending panic attack. Emma's breathing was becoming more rapid, her face pale. But instead of the usual techniques she might employ to ground a patient, Sarah found herself studying the doll more intently. There was something about its construction that had been nagging at her for weeks. The way the torso seemed slightly too large for the limbs, the way the dress seemed to be sewn in a way that couldn't be removed. Most concerning was a small stain on the doll's chest that Emma was always careful to cover with her hand. "Emma, I want you to breathe with me," Sarah said, falling back on her training. "In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Can you do that?" But Emma wasn't listening. She was whispering more urgently to the doll now, and Sarah could make out fragments. "Not ready. She won't understand. Too dangerous." The session continued for another 30 minutes, but Emma remained agitated, speaking in broken sentences about things that didn't quite make sense. She mentioned her father's late-night visits to her room, her stepmother's cold silences, and always, she returned to the doll as if it were her only ally in a world that had become incomprehensible. When the session ended, Emma rose slowly, cradling the doll with the same careful attention one might give to a newborn. At the door, she paused and turned back to Sarah with an expression that seemed far too old for her 16 years. "Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "what would you do if you knew something terrible, but telling would make everything worse?" Before Sarah could respond, Emma was gone, leaving only the faint scent of old fabric and the unsettling feeling that she was missing something crucial. Sarah sat alone in her office as the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows. She pulled out Emma's file and began making notes, but her eyes kept drifting to the chair where the girl had sat, where she had held that doll like it contained the secrets of the universe. For the first time in her career, Sarah Chen felt that she was dealing with something beyond her expertise. The doll, with its 2 knowing eyes and Emma's fierce protection of it, represented more than childhood trauma or attachment issues. It represented a truth that Emma was either unable or unwilling to share, and Sarah was beginning to suspect that the truth might be more horrifying than anything she had encountered in her years of practice. She made a decision that would change everything. At their next session, she would find a way to examine that doll no matter what it took. Something told her that the answers to Emma's suffering lay not in the girl's words, but in whatever secrets were hidden within the worn fabric and porcelain of her constant companion. Outside, the rain intensified, washing down the windows like tears, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched by those glassy blue eyes, even though the doll had left with Emma 20 minutes ago. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her office early before her first appointment. She had spent the night researching Emma's case more thoroughly, reaching out to contacts at Child Protective Services, and reviewing every note she had taken during their sessions. What she found painted a disturbing picture of a girl who had learned to survive by keeping secrets, who had found in an inanimate object the protection and understanding that the adults in her life had failed to provide. Emma's father, Robert Morrison, was a successful businessman who had remarried quickly after his first wife's departure. The stepmother, Patricia, was a former model who seemed more concerned with maintaining her social status than with her husband's troubled daughter. The family lived in an affluent suburb of Cleveland, in a house that looked perfect from the outside but harbored darkness within its walls. Sarah's investigation revealed that there had been several calls to child services over the years, but nothing had ever been substantiated. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices, seeing Emma walking alone at odd hours, and noticing her increasingly withdrawn behavior. But the Morrison family was wealthy, connected, and skilled at presenting a facade of normalcy. The doll, Sarah realized, had appeared in Emma's life around the same time as her mother's departure. It was as if the girl had transferred all her need for protection and love onto this inanimate object, creating an elaborate fantasy world where the doll could provide the safety that no human adult had been able to guarantee. But Sarah's professional instincts told her there was more to it than simple psychological transference. The way Emma spoke to the doll, the way she seemed to listen for responses, the way she protected it from examination, these behaviors suggested that the doll held real significance beyond its symbolic value. As she prepared for Emma's afternoon appointment, Sarah made plans to try a different approach. Instead of focusing on the doll directly, she would work on building enough trust with Emma to understand what the doll represented. Only then could she begin to address the trauma that had created such an unusual coping mechanism. But first, she needed to understand why Emma believed the doll was dangerous to others, and why she seemed to fear the consequences of revealing its secrets more than she feared continuing to suffer in silence. The afternoon session began much like the others, with Emma taking her usual position on the couch, the doll arranged carefully on her lap. But Sarah noticed something different today. Emma's movements were more deliberate, more protective. She seemed to be shielding the doll from Sarah's view more than usual. "Emma, you seem particularly careful with Lily today," Sarah observed. "Is everything all right?" Emma's response was immediate and startling. "She knows you're watching her," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. "She doesn't like it when people look too closely." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean she knows I'm watching?" "She sees everything. She remembers everything. That's why she's dangerous." Emma's grip on the doll tightened. "She knows what happened to my mother." This was the first time Emma had directly connected the doll to her mother's disappearance. Sarah leaned forward, sensing that they were approaching a breakthrough moment. "Can you tell me what Lily knows about your mother?" Emma began to rock again, but this time her movements were more controlled, as if she was trying to soothe the doll rather than herself. "She was there. She saw everything. She knows why Mom had to leave, why she couldn't take me with her." "And what did she see, Emma?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "She saw what Dad did. She saw what he does. She knows why I can never tell anyone, because if I do, they'll take her away from me and then I'll have no one to protect me." Sarah felt her heart racing. They were finally approaching the truth, but she sensed that one wrong move could cause Emma to retreat back into her protective shell. The doll seemed to be watching her, its glass eyes reflecting the afternoon light in a way that made them appear almost alive. "Emma, I want you to know that you're safe here. Whatever Lily knows, whatever she's seen, I'm here to help you. But I need you to trust me." Emma looked up at Sarah with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone her age. "Dr. Chen, what would you do if the only thing protecting you from a monster was something that everyone else thought was just a toy?" The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized that she was facing something more complex than she had initially understood. The doll wasn't just a comfort object or a coping mechanism. It was Emma's way of preserving evidence, of keeping alive the truth that no one else was willing to see or believe. As the session continued, Sarah began to understand that her role wasn't just to help Emma heal from trauma, but to help her find a way to reveal the truth without losing the only source of protection she had ever known. The doll, with its secrets and its silence, had become both Emma's salvation and her prison, and Sarah was beginning to suspect that the real horror wasn't in Emma's imagination, but in the very real world that had forced a 16-year-old girl to find safety in the embrace of a porcelain doll that had witnessed unspeakable things. The session ended with Emma more agitated than usual, clutching the doll so tightly that her knuckles were white. As she left, she whispered something to Sarah that would haunt her for days to come. "She's getting restless. She wants to tell someone what she knows. But if she does, we'll both be in danger. Both be..." Sarah watched Emma leave, carrying her burden of secrets wrapped in faded pink fabric and porcelain skin. She knew that the next session would be crucial. Either she would find a way to help Emma reveal the truth, or she would lose her completely to the protective fantasy that had become her only refuge from a world that had failed to keep her safe. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained heavy and dark, promising another storm to come. The following Tuesday arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made the October air feel thick and oppressive. Sarah had spent the weekend researching childhood trauma responses, reviewing case studies of children who had created elaborate protective fantasies, and consulting with colleagues about the ethical implications of her growing suspicions about Emma's home life. But nothing had prepared her for what she saw when Emma entered her office that afternoon. The girl looked as if she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes and her usually neat hair was disheveled. Most concerning was the way she held the doll, not with her usual protective care but with a kind of desperate urgency, as if she was trying to keep it from escaping her grasp. "Emma, you look exhausted," Sarah said gently as the girl settled into her usual spot. "Has something happened since our last session?" Emma's response was immediate and unsettling. She began whispering to the doll in urgent, rapid whispers, her body rocking slightly. Sarah could only catch fragments. Told you this would happen. Getting too close. Have to be more careful. Emma, can you help me understand what's troubling you today? The girl looked up with wild eyes. She's angry. She's been angry all weekend. She says you're asking too many questions, getting too close to things that should stay buried. Sarah felt a chill despite the warm afternoon air. When you say she's angry, what does that look like? How do you know? Emma's grip on the doll tightened, and for the first time, Sarah noticed that the doll's dress had been pulled up slightly, revealing what appeared to be a small tear in the fabric of its torso. Emma quickly adjusted the dress to cover it, but not before Sarah caught a glimpse of something dark inside the opening. She talks to me at night, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. She tells me about the things she's seen, the things she remembers. She's been with our family for 4 years now, ever since everything changed. Changed how, Emma? Since Mom left. Since Dad started. Since he became different. Emma's voice cracked and tears began streaming down her face. Lily was Mom's before she was mine. Mom gave her to me the night before she disappeared. She said Lily would keep me safe, that she would remember everything so I wouldn't have to carry it all alone. Sarah leaned forward, her professional training warring with her growing horror at what Emma was revealing. What kinds of things does Lily remember? Emma's crying intensified, but she continued speaking through her tears. The nights when Dad comes to my room, the way Patricia pretends not to hear me crying, the things he does, the things he makes me do. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Lily sees it all. She remembers it all, and she's getting tired of keeping quiet. The office fell silent except for Emma's quiet sobs and the tick of the clock on Sarah's desk. Sarah felt her heart pounding as the full implications of Emma's words sank in. This wasn't a fantasy or a coping mechanism. This was a child's desperate attempt to preserve evidence of ongoing abuse. Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. What you're telling me is very serious. If someone is hurting you, there are people who can help. But I need you to help me understand, when you say Lily remembers these things, what do you mean exactly? Emma looked up with eyes that held both terror and a strange kind of hope. She's not just a doll, Dr. Chen. She's more than that. Mom made sure of that before she left. Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Emma began to unwrap the doll's dress with shaking hands. I'm not supposed to show anyone. Lily doesn't want me to. But I can't carry this alone anymore. Sarah watched in fascination and growing horror as Emma revealed more of the doll's construction. The torso wasn't solid porcelain as she had assumed. It appeared to be hollow, with a carefully concealed opening that had been sewn shut and then reopened multiple times. The fabric around the opening was stained with what looked like old blood. Emma, what's inside Lily? The girl's hands trembled as she held the doll. Evidence, she whispered. Pictures, notes, things Mom collected before she had to leave. Things I've collected since then. Lily keeps them safe, she keeps them hidden. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. Emma, are you telling me that your mother documented abuse and hid the evidence inside this doll? Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't take me with her. She said they'd never believe her word against Dad's. He's too important, too respected. But she said someday, when I was old enough, when it was safe, Lily would help me tell the truth. The implications were staggering. Sarah realized she was looking at potentially years of documented evidence of child abuse, hidden inside a doll that everyone had dismissed as a teenage girl's unusual attachment to a childhood toy. The mother hadn't abandoned her daughter. She had given her the tools to eventually seek justice. Emma, I need to ask you something very important. Have you added anything to what your mother put inside Lily? The girl's face crumpled. I had to. He's gotten worse since Patricia moved in. She knows what he does, but she doesn't care. She just wants the money, the house, the lifestyle. Sometimes I think she encourages him because it keeps his attention off her. Emma's hands were shaking violently now. I started taking pictures with my phone when I could. Writing down dates, times, what happened, I put them inside Lily with Mom's things. She didn't like it at first. She said it was too dangerous. But I had to do something. I couldn't just let it keep happening with no record. Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This 16-year-old girl had been systematically documenting her own abuse for years. storing the evidence inside a doll that she talked to, as if it were alive, because it was the only witness to her suffering that couldn't be intimidated or bought off. Emma, how long has this been going on? The abuse? Since I was 12, right after Mom left. Dad said it was my fault she was gone, that I had to make up for what she took from him when she left. Emma's voice was hollow now, as if she was reciting facts rather than describing her own trauma. Patricia moved in when I was 14. She caught him in my room once. Instead of stopping it, she just told him to be more careful about the noise. Sarah felt tears pricking her own eyes. The level of betrayal this child had experienced was beyond anything she had encountered in her practice. But she forced herself to focus on the immediate need to ensure Emma's safety. Emma, I need you to know that what you're describing is not your fault. None of it is your fault. And I need you to know that there are ways to stop this, to make sure you're safe. Emma's response was immediate and panicked. No! You can't tell anyone, not yet. If they find out about Lily, about what's inside her, Dad will destroy everything. He has friends in the police, friends in the courts. Mom tried to report him once before she left. They didn't believe her. They said she was a hysterical woman trying to hurt her husband's reputation. Sarah felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. As a mandated reporter, she was legally required to report suspected child abuse. But Emma was right. If she moved too quickly, the evidence could be destroyed, and Emma could be left in an even more vulnerable position. Emma, what you've shown me today changes everything. But I need you to trust me to handle this carefully. The evidence inside Lily, we need to make sure it's protected. Can you help me understand how your mother planned for this to work? Emma wiped her tears and looked down at the doll. Mom said that when I turned 18, when I was legally an adult, I could take Lily to the FBI. She said local police might be compromised, but federal agents would have to investigate. She said the evidence would speak for itself. But you're only 16 now. What changed? Why are you telling me this now? Emma's face crumpled again. Because it's getting worse. Because Dad's talking about sending me to boarding school, somewhere far away where no one knows me. He says I'm becoming too difficult, too much trouble. If I go, I'll have to leave Lily behind. And if I leave Lily behind, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood. The doll wasn't just evidence. It was Emma's lifeline, her connection to her mother, and her hope for eventual justice. Separating them would be like taking away her only means of survival. Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. We're going to figure this out together. But I need you to promise me something. I need you to promise that you won't do anything dangerous, that you won't try to handle this alone. Emma looked up with eyes that held both gratitude and terror. What are you going to do? Sarah took a deep breath. I'm going to help you and Lily tell your story, but we're going to do it right. We're going to make sure that when the truth comes out, it can't be ignored or dismissed. As the session ended, Emma carefully rewrapped the doll in its dress, whispering apologies for revealing the secret. Sarah watched, her mind racing with the implications of what she had learned. She was no longer just treating a traumatized teenager. She was potentially the key to bringing down a predator who had been protected by wealth, status, and the silence of his victims. That evening, Sarah sat in her office long after her last appointment, staring at her notes and trying to process the enormity of what Emma had revealed. The doll, Lily, wasn't just a therapeutic tool or a coping mechanism. It was a carefully constructed repository of evidence, created by a desperate mother who had been forced to choose between her own safety and her daughter's future. Sarah realized she was facing one of the most complex ethical situations of her career. She had a legal obligation to report the abuse, but she also had a responsibility to ensure that her actions didn't put Emma in greater danger or result in the destruction of crucial evidence. She made a decision that would change both their lives. She would contact a friend who worked with the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. She would find a way to protect Emma and preserve the evidence, even if it meant taking risks with her own career and safety. As she locked up her office that night, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Emma clutching that doll, whispering to it as if it were the only friend she had in the world. In many ways, it was. The doll had become Emma's protector, her witness, and her hope for justice, all wrapped up in faded pink fabric and porcelain skin. But Sarah also couldn't forget the look in Emma's eyes when she talked about her father's plans to send her away. Time was running out. And if they didn't act soon, both Emma and the evidence she had been protecting might disappear forever. The next few days would determine whether a 16-year-old girl's faith in a porcelain doll would finally lead to justice, or whether the silence that had protected a predator for years would claim another victim. Sarah drove home through the quiet streets of Cleveland, past houses that looked peaceful and normal from the outside, wondering how many other secrets were hidden behind suburban facades, how many other children were fighting battles that the adult world refused to acknowledge. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of turning Emma's whispered confessions and a doll's hidden evidence into a case that could finally bring the truth to light. But tonight, she could only sit with the weight of what she had learned, and hope that she would be strong enough to see it through to the end. The call to FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez came at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, while Sarah was sitting in her kitchen, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She had barely slept, her mind racing through the implications of Emma's revelation and the weight of the decision she was about to make. "Rebecca, it's Sarah Chen. I need your help with something that's complicated." Agent Martinez had been Sarah's college roommate before their careers took them in different directions. Rebecca had spent the last 12 years investigating crimes against children, and Sarah knew that if anyone could navigate the delicate situation with Emma and the evidence hidden inside the doll, it would be her. "How complicated are we talking, Sarah?" "The kind that could either save a child's life or destroy any chance of justice if we handle it wrong." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'll be at your office in 2 hours." Sarah spent the morning reviewing every note she had taken during Emma's sessions, preparing a timeline of revelations and struggling with the ethical implications of what she was about to do. She was about to break patient confidentiality in a way that could end her career, but she was also potentially saving a child who had been failed by every system meant to protect her. When Agent Martinez arrived, Sarah was struck by how much her friend had changed. The carefree college student had been replaced by a woman whose eyes held the weight of too many cases involving children who had suffered unimaginable horrors. Rebecca's dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression was all business from the moment she walked through the door. "Tell me everything," Rebecca said, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. Sarah began with Emma's first appointment, the doll that never left her side, and the gradual revelation of the truth behind the girl's protective relationship with what everyone had assumed was simply a comfort object. As she spoke, she watched Rebecca's expression grow more serious, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. "You're telling me that this girl has been carrying documented evidence of ongoing sexual abuse for 4 years, hidden inside a doll that her mother prepared before she fled?" Rebecca's voice was carefully controlled, but Sarah could hear the anger beneath the surface. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And Rebecca, there's more. Emma's father is Robert Morrison. He owns Morrison Development, one of the largest construction companies in Ohio. He's connected, wealthy, and according to Emma, he has friends in local law enforcement." Rebecca's jaw tightened. That explains why the mother's initial reports were dismissed. "Do you have any idea what kind of evidence we're talking about?" "Photos, documents, recordings." Emma mentioned photographs, notes, dates, and times. Her mother apparently documented everything she could before she left, and Emma has been adding to it. But Rebecca, the girl is terrified. She's convinced that if we move too quickly, her father will destroy everything and she'll be left with nothing. "She's probably right," Rebecca said grimly. "Men like Morrison don't stay in power by being careless. If he gets wind of an investigation, he'll have teams of lawyers and private investigators working to discredit everyone involved before we can blink." Sarah felt her heart sink. "So what do we do?" "Emma is scheduled to see me again tomorrow. Her father is talking about sending her to boarding school, potentially within the next few weeks. If she's separated from that doll, we need to see the evidence first," Rebecca said decisively. "I need to know exactly what we're dealing with before we can plan our next move. Can you get the girl to show you what's inside the doll?" Sarah considered this. "I think so. She's already shown me that there's something inside. She's desperate for help, but she's also terrified of making the wrong move. I think if I explained that you specialize in these cases, that you have the power to protect her that local authorities don't have." "Set up the meeting," Rebecca said. "But Sarah, I need you to understand something. Once we open that doll, once we see what's inside, there's no going back. This becomes an active federal investigation, and Emma becomes a federal witness. Her life will never be the same. Her life isn't sustainable as it is. Sarah replied. She's 16 years old and she's been documenting her own sexual abuse for years. She's having panic attacks. She can't form normal relationships and she's so traumatized that she's created an entire fantasy world around a doll just to cope with her reality. Rebecca nodded grimly. You're right, but I need you to prepare her for what comes next. If the evidence is as substantial as you think it is, Morrison will be arrested within days of us securing it. Emma will need to be placed in protective custody immediately. Her stepmother may be arrested as an accessory. Emma's entire world is about to implode. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She knows. On some level she knows. That's why she's held on to this for so long. She's been waiting for the right moment, the right person to trust. Then let's make sure we're worthy of that trust. The next afternoon, Emma arrived at Sarah's office with the doll clutched even more tightly than usual. Sarah could see the girl's anxiety from across the room. Her hands were shaking, and she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to burst through it at any moment. Emma, I want you to meet someone, Sarah said gently. This is Agent Rebecca Martinez from the FBI. She specializes in helping children who have been hurt by adults who were supposed to protect them. Emma's eyes widened with fear, and she pulled the doll closer to her chest. You told her? You told her about Lily? Emma, I told her because I believe you deserve help. And I believe Agent Martinez has the power to help you in ways that I can't. But nothing happens without your permission. Nothing happens unless you decide you're ready. Rebecca had positioned herself across the room, deliberately keeping her distance to avoid overwhelming Emma. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but confident. Emma, Dr. Chen has told me about Lily, and about how brave you've been. I want you to know that I've helped other children in situations similar to yours. I understand how frightening this must be. Emma studied Rebecca's face carefully. Are you going to take Lily away from me? I'm going to make sure Lily's secrets are heard by people who can act on them, Rebecca said. But I'm also going to make sure you're safe. Both of you. Emma was quiet for several long minutes, rocking slightly and whispering to the doll. Finally, she looked up at Sarah. Lily says she's tired of keeping secrets. She says it's time. With trembling hands, Emma began to unwrap the doll's dress. Sarah watched as Rebecca's expression shifted from professional concern to barely contained shock as the doll's modified torso was revealed. The opening in the porcelain was larger than Sarah had initially realized, and the staining around the edges suggested it had been opened and closed many times over the years. Emma, can you show us what's inside? Rebecca asked quietly. Emma reached into the doll's torso and began removing items one by one. First came a small plastic bag containing what appeared to be photographs. Then a stack of folded papers, yellowed with age. Finally, a newer plastic bag containing what looked like more recent photographs and handwritten notes. Rebecca approached slowly, pulling on latex gloves before examining the evidence. As she looked through the photographs, Sarah saw her jaw clench and her breathing become more controlled. The professional mask was slipping, revealing the anger and disgust beneath. Emma, I need to ask you some questions about this evidence. Some of them might be difficult. Is that okay? Emma nodded, though her grip on the now empty doll remained tight. These older photographs, you said your mother took these? Most of them. She hid a camera in my room after she started suspecting what Dad was doing. She said she knew no one would believe her without proof. Rebecca examined the photographs more closely. And these newer ones? I took those with my phone. After I got older, after I understood what Mom was trying to do, I knew I had to keep documenting what was happening. Sarah felt sick as she watched Rebecca catalog the evidence. The photographs were clear, undeniably showing Robert Morrison in Emma's bedroom, engaged in acts that left no doubt about the nature of the abuse. But what struck Sarah most was the methodical way Emma had documented everything. Dates, time, circumstances, even her own physical injuries. Emma, these notes, did you write all of these? Some of them. Mom wrote the older ones. She documented everything she could before she left. She said that someday when it was safe, someone would need to know exactly what happened and when. Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, reading through the handwritten accounts. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Emma, what you and your mother have done here, this is incredibly brave. This is the kind of evidence that ends careers and puts people in prison for a very long time. Emma's response surprised both women. Will it hurt Patricia too? She knew. She's always known. Sometimes she would stand outside my door and listen. She never tried to stop it. If we can prove she knew and failed to report it, yes. She'll face charges as well. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. Good. She could have helped me, she could have stopped it, but she chose not to because it was easier for her if Dad left her alone. Rebecca carefully placed all the evidence into official FBI evidence bags, documenting each item. Emma, I need you to understand what happens next. Based on what you've shown me today, I'm going to get a warrant for your father's arrest. But that means we need to get you somewhere safe before we move on him. What about Lily? Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. Lily has done her job, Rebecca said gently. She's kept your secrets safe, and now she's helped us make sure those secrets will be heard by the right people. But you won't need to carry this burden alone anymore. Emma looked down at the empty doll in her arms. For the first time since Sarah had known her, the girl seemed to see it as what it really was. A porcelain doll with glass eyes and carefully styled hair. The weight of secrets was gone, and with it, the illusion that had sustained Emma through the darkest period of her life. She looks different now, Emma said quietly. Empty. She's not empty, Sarah said. She's fulfilled her purpose. Your mother gave her to you to keep you safe until you could find help. And she did exactly that. Rebecca spent the next hour taking Emma's formal statement, recording her testimony, and walking her through what would happen in the coming days. Emma would be placed in emergency foster care while the investigation proceeded. Her father would be arrested within 48 hours. The media attention would be intense given Morrison's prominence in the community. Emma, I won't lie to you, this is going to be difficult. Your father has resources and he's going to fight these charges. But what you've given us today makes this case virtually impossible to defend against. You've been building a federal case for 4 years without even knowing it. As the session ended, Emma carefully dressed the doll again, smoothing its hair and adjusting its clothing. But the desperate protective quality of her movements was gone. She was caring for the doll now the way a child might care for any treasured toy, not as a guardian of terrible secrets. Dr. Chen, Emma said as she prepared to leave, will I still be able to see you after everything changes? Sarah felt tears threatening. If you want to, yes. You're going to need support as you work through all of this, but Emma, I want you to know how proud I am of you. What you did today took incredible courage. Emma hugged the doll close one last time. Lily says thank you too. She says she's ready to rest now. After Emma left, Sarah and Rebecca sat in the quiet office, both processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the space of 2 hours, a child's therapeutic relationship with a doll had been transformed into a federal criminal case that would likely make national news. How do you do this? Sarah asked. How do you carry these stories without breaking? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. You remember that for every child like Emma, there are dozens who never find the courage to speak up. You remember that the evidence she carried in that doll might prevent other children from going through what she did. And you make sure that when a child trusts you with their truth, you're worthy of that trust. That evening, Sarah received a call from Child Protective Services. Emma had been placed with an emergency foster family, a couple who specialized in caring for children who had been severely traumatized. The foster mother was a retired teacher, the father a counselor who worked with abuse survivors. They understood the importance of maintaining Emma's connection to her therapist during the transition. The arrest warrant for Robert Morrison was issued the next morning. FBI agents surrounded the Morrison development offices at 9:15 a.m., taking Morrison into custody in front of his employees and business associates. The charges were extensive: multiple counts of sexual abuse of a minor, child endangerment, and federal charges related to the production and possession of child pornography. Patricia Morrison was arrested 2 hours later at the family's suburban home, charged with failure to report child abuse and accessory to child endangerment. The house was searched, yielding additional evidence that corroborated Emma's account. The story broke on the evening news that same day. Prominent Cleveland businessman arrested on child abuse charges was the lead story on every local station. The details were limited to protect Emma's privacy, but the community was shocked by the allegations against a man who had been seen as a pillar of respectability. Sarah watched the coverage from her office, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. The truth was finally out, but Emma's real healing was just beginning. The girl would have to testify, relive her trauma in court, and rebuild her entire understanding of family and safety. But as Sarah thought about Emma's final words about the doll being ready to rest, she felt a sense of hope. For the first time in 4 years, Emma Morrison was truly safe. The secrets that had been hidden in porcelain and fabric were now in the hands of people who could act on them. And somewhere in a foster home across town, a 16-year-old girl was learning what it felt like to go to sleep without having to guard against the footsteps in the hallway, without having to whisper her fears to a doll that had carried the weight of unspeakable truths for far too long. 3 weeks after Robert Morrison's arrest, Sarah received an emergency call at 11:30 p.m. Emma had been rushed to Cleveland General Hospital after what the foster family described as a complete psychological breakdown. She was found in her room, catatonic, clutching the doll so tightly that paramedics had difficulty separating them. Sarah arrived at the hospital to find Emma in the pediatric psychiatric ward, staring blankly at the ceiling while the doll sat on the bedside table, looking somehow diminished without Emma's constant attention. The foster mother, Mrs. Patterson, met Sarah in the hallway with tears in her eyes. She was doing so well, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice breaking. She was eating, talking to us, even smiled a few times. But then the defense attorney's investigator showed up at her school today. He didn't approach her directly, but she saw him talking to her teachers, taking notes. That's when everything fell apart. Sarah felt a surge of anger. He's not supposed to have any contact with her, even indirect contact. Agent Martinez is on her way. Mrs. Patterson continued. But Dr. Chen, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if she's completely retreated into herself. She won't speak, won't respond to anything. The only time she showed any reaction was when we tried to move the doll away from her. Sarah entered Emma's room quietly, taking in the scene. The girl who had shown such courage in revealing her secrets now looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. Emma, Sarah said softly, sitting in the chair beside the bed. It's Dr. Chen, I'm here. No response. Emma continued staring at the ceiling as if Sarah wasn't there. Sarah glanced at the doll, noticing that its dress was disheveled and its hair tangled, as if Emma had been holding it with desperate force. Agent Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, her expression grim. The defense is playing dirty, she said without preamble. Morrison's attorney is trying to intimidate Emma before she has to testify. The investigator wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her school, but technically he didn't violate the restraining order because he didn't make direct contact. What does this mean for the case? Sarah asked, though she was more concerned about Emma's immediate well-being than the legal implications. It means they're scared, Rebecca said, studying Emma's catatonic form. Morrison's attorney knows that Emma's testimony combined with the evidence from the doll makes this case unwinnable. They're trying to break her before she can take the stand. Sarah felt a chill. And if she can't testify? The physical evidence is strong, but Emma's testimony ties it all together. Without her voice, Morrison's defense team will argue that the photographs could have been staged, that the dates and times in the notes could have been fabricated. They'll claim this is all an elaborate frame-up by a vindictive ex-wife. Sarah looked at Emma's still form. She's 16 years old. She's been through hell for 4 years, found the courage to come forward, and now she's being traumatized all over again by the legal system that's supposed to protect her. I know, Rebecca said quietly. But Sarah, if Emma can't testify, Morrison walks. And if Morrison walks, he's free to hurt other children. Emma understands the stakes here, even if she can't express it right now. Dr. Williams, the hospital's chief psychiatrist, joined them in the room. I've reviewed Emma's case file and consulted with my team, he said. What we're seeing appears to be a severe dissociative episode triggered by re-traumatization. The girl has essentially shut down as a protective mechanism. How long could this last? Sarah asked. Days, weeks, potentially months. The mind's ability to protect itself through dissociation is remarkable, but it can also be incredibly stubborn. Emma may not emerge from this state until she feels completely safe, and given that she's facing the prospect of testifying against her abuser in open court, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implications. Sarah spent the next 3 days at Emma's bedside, talking to the unresponsive girl, reading to her, and trying every therapeutic technique she knew to break through the dissociative barrier. Emma's condition remained unchanged. She would accept food and water when prompted, but showed no signs of awareness or engagement with her surroundings. On the fourth day, something changed. Sarah arrived at the hospital to find Emma sitting up in bed, staring intently at the doll. She wasn't speaking, but there was a quality of attention in her posture that hadn't been there before. "Emma," Sarah said cautiously, "can you hear me?" Emma's eyes flicked to Sarah's face for just a moment before returning to the doll. It was the first sign of awareness she had shown since the breakdown. "She's trying to tell me something," Emma said suddenly, her voice hoarse from days of silence. "Lily's trying to tell me something, but I can't hear her anymore." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and concern. Emma was responding, but she seemed to be retreating back into the fantasy relationship with the doll that had sustained her for so long. "What do you think she's trying to tell you?" Sarah asked gently. Emma picked up the doll, cradling it carefully. "She's different now. Empty. Ever since we told her secrets, she's been different. She doesn't talk to me like she used to." Sarah realized what was happening. The doll had served its purpose as a repository for secrets and evidence, but Emma had relied on it for so much more than that. It had been her protector, her confidant, her only reliable source of comfort in a world that had betrayed her repeatedly. Now that the secrets were out, Emma was struggling to understand what role the doll should play in her life. "Emma, do you remember what happened at school? Why you became so upset?" Emma's grip on the doll tightened. "They want to hurt me again. Dad's lawyer, the investigator. They want to make everyone think I'm lying. They want to make Lily's secrets meaningless." "But Lily's secrets aren't meaningless, Emma. Agent Martinez has all the evidence now. The photographs, the notes, the documentation you both worked so hard to preserve. It's all safe." Emma looked at Sarah with eyes that held both hope and terror. "But what if they don't believe it? What if they think Mom and I made it all up? What if they think I'm crazy for talking to a doll?" Sarah felt her heart breaking for this child who had survived so much, only to face the additional trauma of having her truth questioned by people who were supposed to seek justice. "Emma, I want to tell you something that might help. Agent Martinez told me that in all her years of investigating these cases, she's never seen evidence as thorough and well-documented as what you and your mother collected. The defense team is trying to intimidate you because they know they can't win based on the facts." Over the next week, Emma slowly emerged from her dissociative state, but the process was complicated by her changing relationship with the doll. She would have conversations with it, then become frustrated when it didn't respond the way it used to. She would hold it protectively, then push it away in anger. "She's not the same," Emma told Sarah during one session. "She used to understand everything. She used to know what I was feeling, what I needed to hear. Now she's just quiet." Sarah realized that Emma was grieving the loss of her primary coping mechanism. The doll had been more than a comfort object. It had been a personification of her mother's love and protection, a voice of wisdom and strength when Emma felt powerless. Now that the secrets were revealed, Emma had to learn to find that strength within herself. "Emma, I think Lily is quiet now because she's done what she needed to do. She kept you safe until you could find people who would listen and act on what she knew. Maybe now it's time for you to find your own voice." The conversation was interrupted by Agent Martinez, who arrived with news that would change everything. "Emma, I need to talk to you about the case. Morrison's defense team has made an offer." Emma clutched the doll closer. "What kind of offer?" "They want to plead to reduce charges in exchange for avoiding a trial. Morrison would serve 5 to 7 years in prison, but Emma wouldn't have to testify." Sarah saw the relief flood Emma's face, followed quickly by confusion. "What does that mean exactly?" Rebecca sat down carefully. "It means Morrison would admit to some of the abuse, but not all of it. He'd serve less time than he deserves, but he'd be a registered sex offender and would never be allowed unsupervised contact with children again." "And if we don't take the plea?" Emma asked. "Then we go to trial. Morrison's team will do everything they can to discredit you, to make the jury believe you're unstable or lying. They'll argue that your relationship with the doll proves you can't distinguish between fantasy and reality. It will be brutal, Emma. But if we win, Morrison could spend the rest of his life in prison." Emma was quiet for several long minutes, staring at the doll in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "What do you think I should do?" Sarah felt the weight of the moment. "Emma, this has to be your decision. But I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'll support you. You've been incredibly brave already, No one would blame you for wanting to avoid a trial. Emma lifted the doll to eye level, studying its porcelain face. Lily carried these secrets for 4 years. She protected them, kept them safe, made sure they couldn't be destroyed or forgotten. If I take the plea deal, it's like saying her sacrifice wasn't worth fighting for. Rebecca leaned forward. Emma, you don't owe anyone anything. You've done more than enough already. But I do owe someone something, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. I owe my mother, who gave up everything to give me the tools to seek justice. I owe all the other girls who might be hurt if my father doesn't face the full consequences of what he did. And I owe Lily, who kept my secrets safe until I was brave enough to tell them. Emma stood up, placing the doll carefully on the bed. I want to go to trial. I want to testify. I want everyone to hear what Lily knew, what she saw, what she protected. Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. This was the moment Emma had been building toward for 4 years. The moment when she would step out from behind the protective barrier of her relationship with the doll and speak her truth in her own voice. The trial began 6 weeks later, drawing national media attention to the case of the teenage girl who had hidden evidence of abuse inside a doll. Emma's testimony was scheduled for the 3rd day, and as that day approached, Sarah could see the girl's anxiety building. What if I forget something important? Emma asked during their final preparation session. What if I can't remember the dates right? Or if I get confused about which incident happened when? Emma, you don't have to remember everything perfectly. The evidence speaks for itself. The photographs, the notes, the documentation. Your job is just to tell your truth. Emma nodded, but Sarah could see she was still frightened. That's when Emma made an unexpected request. Dr. Chen, can I bring Lily with me to court? Not to hold or anything, but just to have her there? Sarah was about to explain that bringing the doll might reinforce the defense's claims about Emma's mental state, but something stopped her. She realized that the doll had been Emma's source of strength and protection for 4 years. Asking her to face her abuser without that symbolic support might be asking too much. Let me talk to Agent Martinez, Sarah said. After lengthy discussions with the prosecution team, it was decided that the doll would be allowed in the courtroom, but it would sit with Sarah in the gallery rather than with Emma at the witness stand. It was a compromise that acknowledged the doll's importance to Emma, while avoiding the appearance that she needed it to testify. The morning of Emma's testimony, Sarah sat in the courtroom gallery with the doll in her lap, feeling the weight of its symbolic importance. Across the room, Robert Morrison sat at the defense table, looking confident and well-dressed, flanked by expensive attorneys who had built their careers on discrediting victims. When Emma was called to the witness stand, Sarah watched her walk forward with a composure that was remarkable for someone her age. Emma had asked to wear a blue dress, her mother's favorite color, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked young, vulnerable, but determined. But the prosecution's questions were gentle but thorough, walking Emma through her story from the beginning. She spoke about her mother's growing suspicions, the hidden camera, the night her mother gave her the doll before disappearing. Emma's voice was steady as she described the years of abuse, the documentation she had added to her mother's evidence, and the way the doll had served as both protector and witness. When it came time for cross-examination, Morrison's attorney was aggressive from the first question. Miss Morrison, isn't it true that you've been receiving psychiatric treatment for your unusual attachment to a doll? Yes, Emma said simply. And isn't it true that you've claimed this doll talks to you, gives you advice, remembers things for you? Emma paused, glancing briefly toward Sarah and the doll in her lap. Lily never talked to me the way people talk. She was a way for me to cope with things that were too difficult to handle alone. But you did believe the doll was alive, didn't you? You treated it as if it were a real person? Emma's answer surprised everyone in the courtroom. No, I never believed Lily was alive. I always knew she was a doll. But she represented something important. She was my connection to my mother, and she was proof that what was happening to me was real and documented. Talking to her was a way of talking to myself, of finding strength when I felt powerless. The attorney pressed harder. Miss Morrison, how can the jury believe anything you say when you've admitted to having conversations with an inanimate object for 4 years? Emma looked directly at her father for the first time since entering the courtroom. Because Lily kept secrets that I was too scared to tell. She protected evidence that proved those secrets were true. And now that evidence is here, in this courtroom, speaking for itself. The cross-examination continued for 2 more hours, but Emma's composure never wavered. She answered every question honestly, acknowledged her psychological struggles without shame, and consistently returned to the physical evidence that supported her testimony. When it was over, Emma stepped down from the witness stand and walked toward the gallery. As she passed Sarah's row, she paused and looked at the doll one final time. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly that only Sarah could hear. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Robert Morrison was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. Patricia Morrison received 5 years for her role in enabling the abuse and failing to protect Emma. After the sentencing, Emma, Sarah, and Agent Martinez stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by media attention but feeling a profound sense of closure. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now you get to be a normal teenager," Rebecca said. "You get to go to school, make friends, think about college. You get to have a life that isn't defined by secrets and fear." Emma nodded, then turned to Sarah. "What about Lily? What happens to her now?" Sarah had been thinking about this question for weeks. "What do you think should happen to her?" Emma considered this carefully. "I think she's earned her rest. She did what she was supposed to do. She kept me safe until I could save myself." That evening, Emma and her foster family held a small ceremony in their backyard. Emma placed the doll in a wooden box along with letters she had written to her mother, thanking her for the courage to document the truth and for giving her the tools to eventually find justice. The box was buried beneath a newly planted oak tree, with a small marker that read simply, "Lily, keeper of secrets, guardian of truth." As they stood around the small grave, Emma spoke the words that would mark the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. She was never just a doll. She was hope when I had none, strength when I was weak, and proof that the truth matters even when it's dangerous to tell. She kept my secrets until I was brave enough to speak them myself. 6 months later, Emma started her senior year of high school. She had been accepted to several colleges and was planning to study social work, hoping to help other children who found themselves trapped in situations similar to her own. Sarah continued as Emma's therapist, helping her navigate the complexities of healing from trauma while building a new identity that wasn't defined by survival. They rarely talked about the doll anymore, but sometimes Emma would mention dreams where she saw her mother, proud and smiling, finally at peace knowing that her daughter was safe. The case became a landmark in federal prosecution of child abuse, particularly for the way it demonstrated how children might preserve evidence in unconventional ways. Law enforcement agencies across the country began training officers to recognize and properly handle cases where children had found creative ways to document abuse. But for Emma, the most important outcome was simpler. She could sleep through the night without fear. She could form relationships without constant vigilance. And she could look toward a future that was full of possibilities rather than shadows. The doll that had carried her secrets for 4 years was finally at rest, its purpose fulfilled. And Emma Morrison, no longer a victim but a survivor and advocate, was finally free to discover who she could become when she wasn't spending all her energy simply trying to survive. In the end, the truth had set them both free. The girl who had found the courage to speak, and the silent witness who had kept her secret safe until that courage could be found. What did you think of Emma's incredible journey of courage and survival? This story shows us the power of truth and the lengths people will go to protect the innocent. Stories like these remind us why it's so important to listen to those who find the courage to speak up. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help us reach more people who need to hear messages of hope and justice. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our powerful true-to-life stories that explore the depths of human resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever encountered a situation where someone found an unusual way to preserve the truth? Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that have been silent the longest.